We go live to the UN as the 77th General Assembly takes place. The President of Bolivia, Arce, will address the nation.
To welcome His Excellency Luis Alberto Arce Catacora, Constitutional President of the Plurinational State of Bolivia, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I want to greet dear President of the General Assembly, Saba Corossi, dear Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and brothers and sisters, heads of state and government, foreign ministers, and the delegates present here. First of all, dear Saba Corossi, allow me to hail your election as President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and to express to you on behalf of the plurinational state of Bolivia our support for your hard work for the benefit of the international community. May this 77th session allow us to continue strengthening multilateralism to confront more effectively both new and older threats that are stalking humankind. Dear President, today we find ourselves in the face of multiple and systemic crises of capitalism that increasingly puts at risk the life of humanity and of the planet. There is no doubt that the challenges that we confront are increasingly more complex. If we truly seek a better future for current and future generations, we must not only think about the economic, social, food supply, climate, energy, water supply, and commercial crises, but also clearly identify their origins to change a system that reproduces domination, exploitation, and the exclusion of the vast majority, that generates concentration of wealth in a few hands, in the hands of the few, and that puts priority on the production and reproduction of capital instead of the creation and reproduction of life. But at the same time as we face the multiple and systemic crisis of capitalism, we observe the final chapter of the unipolar world, the construction of a new world order that we hope will be for the benefit of all states and of all peoples is inexorable. And as we are convinced that another world is possible, we in the plurinational state of Bolivia wish to posit the following. Number one, to declare the world as a zone of peace. Bearing this in mind, we express our dismay at the considerable number of armed conflicts ravaging humankind, many of them promoted by military transnational corporations, but also in order to impose a global economic and political order that benefits the interests of capitalism. These conflicts have a very high human cost, and in too many cases they lead to the destruction of our cultural and environmental heritage. Now, independently of the origin, nature, or the geopolitical reasons of international tensions, the plurinational state of Bolivia has embraced and will continue to embrace a culture of dialogue among nations through diplomacy of peoples. However, unfortunately, we observe the increasing deterioration of the multilateral system due to the fancy of capitalist powers to not acquiesce to the existence of a multipolar world with a balance of power. Multilateralism is the only mechanism that represents a guarantee of respect among states independently of their economic or military power. Therefore, we consider that any breach of international peace and security is linked to the inadequate implementation of the mechanisms provided for in the United Nations Charter, or alternatively, linked to their flagrant violation. The countries that are members of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, declared in 2014 our region as a zone of peace, and we committed ourselves to resolve peacefully our disputes while banishing forever the use of force in our region. Now, along these lines, we advocate for this assembly to be a space of a broad historic agreement, an agreement where dialogue and diplomacy has primacy over any dispute, and where the world should be declared as a zone of peace. To achieve this goal, it is extremely important among various initiatives for the United Nations to work tirelessly to achieve a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, so that the historic rights of the Palestinian people and state are respected, and for NATO to set aside its expansionist plans. Number 2, substituting the manufacture of weapons of mass destruction by a fair compensation to the poor people of the world. That is our second proposal. It is precisely the lack of dialogue and the measures of preventive diplomacy that has drawn us into an era of major tensions globally and growing uncertainty and instability in global security. We are experiencing times where a concentration of a large number of weapons of mass destruction in the hands of a small group of countries, the very same countries that are refusing to eliminate these weapons by giving priority to their geopolitical interests, all this are endangering peace and security of our planet. 9 countries today have 12,700 nuclear warheads. 9,440 of them are in a state of combat readiness, ready to be used. In the face of this frightening reality that the world is facing, we must raise the banner of demanding that military expenditures be for the manufacture of weapons of mass destruction be replaced by fair economic compensation that the main capitalist countries owe morally and historically to the countries on the periphery and the poor countries of the world. Number 3, against the mercantilization of healthcare and for a universal system of healthcare. In the past few years, our countries not only have had to confront an uncertainty due to conflicts, however, we have also confronted a very serious sanitary crisis due to COVID-19. This has exposed the vulnerabilities and inequalities of our healthcare systems around the world, as well as the inequalities of the global financial and economic system. In the face of healthcare systems that favor only those who have the possibility to have private health insurance, and in the face of those who have transformed health care into a merchandise, it is essential to strengthen universal healthcare systems where the state fulfills its obligation to protect and guarantee collective rights in the framework of the primacy of human, economic, social, and cultural rights, reducing thus the impact of the global economic crisis on the most vulnerable sectors of the population. Number 4, a global program of food sovereignty in harmony with Mother Earth. Another manifestation of the structural and multiple crisis of capitalism is the food crisis, which is aggravated by the effects of the pandemic and exacerbated by global geopolitical conflicts and the multiple environmental crises that the planet confronts. A situation that only has affected the implementation of the SDGs, but also threatens the most basic rights of millions of human beings. And according to the report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world 2022, the number of people suffering from hunger in the world has increased dramatically over the past few years. Just in 2021, a total of 828 million people were victims of this scourge. That represents 9.8% of the population of the world. Asia, with 425 million people affected, and Africa, with 278 million, continue to be the regions that are hardest hit by this crisis. While in Latin America and the Caribbean, the crisis has affected over 56 million people. In the face of the food crisis, we must urgently implement a global program of food security that guarantees to small-scale producers better conditions for their work. This implies access to seeds, fertilizers, technology infrastructure, credits, and various forms, both private and community-based, of access to markets. But it also means better conditions of life in their communities in full harmony with Mother Earth. Number 5, we need to rebuild the productive and economic capacities of countries on the periphery, hit hard by the inexorable logic of the concentration of capital. In addition to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that have deteriorated our economies and our commercial transactions, today we're confronting monetary expansion sustained by inflation. That is one of the main problems today. For example, in August of 2022, the United States registered an annual inflation of 8.25%. That's the highest of the past 4 decades. And an unprecedented rate of inflation of 9.8% in the Eurozone. Additionally, the war between Russia and Ukraine has exacerbated the pressure on the price of energy, food, fertilizers, commodities, and others. In July of this year, annual inflation of food increased and reached double-digit levels in some countries of Europe and in the United States. In a world that's closely interconnected, it is important to respond to the needs of our peoples in the post-pandemic context, strengthening integration and cooperation based on the principles of solidarity, complementarity, respect for self-determination of peoples, so that we can confront the multidimensional impact on the economy, on our industries, as well as on our productive capacities and our self-sufficiency. To achieve this, it is essential to restructure the global financial architecture, to ease the external debt burden globally, so that developing countries have an opportunity to implement in a sovereign way our social policies with a focus on economic, social development that is comprehensive and sustainable. And as always, our call of the southern countries has been to rebalance our trade relations because currently they continue to benefit only northern countries. And on this point, I would like to humbly share with you the experience of Bolivia. Following the restoration of democracy in 2020, thanks to the unity, the combat, and the conscience of our people, we returned to the path laid out by our democratic and cultural revolution of dignity and sovereignty. We resumed the construction of our plurinational state and the consolidation of our model of economic, social, and community-based production, a sovereign economic model in which we will not accept, nor will we accept, impositions of the International Monetary Fund. Our economic model reflects our political, economic, social, and cultural reality, and it is based on an active role of the state in the economy, in the nationalization of our strategic natural resources, the interconnection of all forms of economic organization, the strengthening of public investment, the industrialization with import substitution, the fostering of the domestic market, productive diversification, ensuring food sovereignty, redistributing income, fighting against poverty and inequality. In other words, we are seeking an economic growth with social justice inspired by our civilization of living well, which has emerged from our original indigenous roots. These policies that are responsible and sovereign have allowed us to return to the path of stability with economic growth, with redistribution of income. During the first quarter of 2022, our economy has grown by 4%, fueled by domestic demand. and our inflation was 1.6% during the month of August. Thus, our economy has the lowest inflation of the region and one of the lowest in the world compared to inflation rates of various countries that over the past 12 months have exceeded double digits. In the social sphere, during the second quarter of 2022, Bolivia registered the lowest level of unemployment in the region with 4.5%, and international organizations such as ECLAC have stated that we are the countries that will reduce poverty the most in 2022, while other countries have even seen increases in poverty. However, as many other countries on the periphery, we still are making huge efforts to resolve problems related to the multidimensional and systemic crisis that affects us, and that causes our recovery to be more difficult with each time. We regret that while the main countries of capitalism spend huge amounts of money for war, they make tiny contributions to sustainable development, for decolonization and rooting out patriarchy, for the eradication of poverty, inequalities. An example of this is that in the last 12 months, 20 times more resources have been dedicated to the conflict in Eastern Europe compared to what was pledged to the Green Climate Fund over the past decade. Peace cannot be achieved by buying and selling weapons, but rather by working together to build, and if necessary, rebuild the economic and productive capacities of all countries. The sixth proposal. The climate crisis requires responsibility, solidarity, and harmony among human beings and nature, rather than profit-seeking. Another crisis that threatens to destroy humankind and the integrity of our Mother Earth is the climate crisis. From the crisis, this has become an environmental collapse. The discouraging levels of reduction of emissions that have been observed and projected to date demonstrate that countries that have the means to change their production and consumption patterns don't have the political will to do so, and that those who have set ambitious targets for ourselves have not received the means of implementation promised in the Framework Convention and in the Paris Agreement to achieve these goals. Even more, those that bear the greatest responsibility for the emission of greenhouse gases now demand that each country continues to seek the illusion of decarbonization by 2050 without taking into account the historic responsibilities of developed countries, nor the capabilities or limitations of developing countries, for whom the access to green technologies of the latest generation is becoming increasingly unreachable. Perhaps the historic climate debtors want us all to only worry about the future in order to avoid discussing the promises unfulfilled in the present to developing countries on financing, transfer of technologies, and capacity building. Recently, the flooding in Pakistan, to whose people we want to express our solidarity, serve as another example that is eloquent and tangible of the high human and material cost of the losses and damage caused by centuries of bad capitalist development. Today more than ever, it is clear that we need a specific financial mechanism based on solidarity and not on profit-seeking to confront the losses and damage caused by the climate crisis in countries in the process of intense development of their productive forces. We're convinced that a future that is low in emissions and resilient to climate is not possible if we continue concentrating wealth in the hands of the few. Therefore, in order to reverse the climate crisis, we need to resolve economic, social, and political contradictions created by the capitalist model, as well as the contradictions that exist between human beings and nature. Seventh proposal, the industrialization of lithium for the benefit of peoples and as a fundamental pillar for an energy transition. Now I'd like to refer to a natural strategic resource. Our country possesses the largest reserves of lithium in the world, and we have assumed this with great responsibility, especially at a time of not implementing actions for its industrialization, thus guaranteeing that its utilization continues to benefit all of humankind as a fundamental pillar of a just global transition to a future that is low in emissions and respectful of Mother Earth. We want our reserves of lithium not to follow the path of other natural resources that, in conditions of colonialism and capitalist development, only serve to increase the wealth of the few and provoke hunger among peoples. Bearing this in mind, we have consolidated our sovereignty over our natural resources as lithium, its industrialization, and the benefit drawn from it geared toward the well-being of peoples, not to the benefit of transnationals or a small privileged group, and the sovereign appropriation of the economic surplus to be redistributed among the population that has the lowest income. We also reject any kind of interference or attempts to destabilize the democracy in our country with the goal of controlling lithium. According to what was stated by the commanding officer of the Southern Command of the United States just a couple months ago, the so-called lithium triangle located in South America, formed by Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, is the focus of the United States. The United Nations must take measures against all those countries that don't respect the sovereignty and non-interference, and that confront peoples for the control of their strategic natural resources. We are not pieces on a chessboard. We are nations at work day in, day out to move forward, and we have every right to make sovereign decisions over our natural resources. Number 8 proposal: from nationalization to the regionalization of the fight against drug trafficking. We have to change the approach in dealing with combat against drug trafficking. We continue to focus on supply and not on demand, and this has only served as a pretext for the militarization and deployment of the international war against drugs. This has affected the farmers in the southern countries and has left in impunity the major criminal groups that have never been publicly identified in the countries where drugs are consumed. The international war against drugs criminalizes and generates unilateral sanctions against southern countries. However, it provides opportunities for laundering assets, facilitates drug trafficking and other related crimes in the northern countries. This cannot continue. With our positive results in the combat against drug trafficking, Bolivia has defended its model, and we have been working together with Peru and Colombia and other countries affected by transit of drugs in seeking to regionalize the combat against drug trafficking based on a comprehensive approach that is less militarized and more focused on economic and social aspects. We must work in the United Nations on a mechanism to evaluate the results, not only in southern countries, but also the results of the activity in northern countries. One of those northern countries certifies, quote-unquote, unilaterally the combat against drugs. 9, strengthen international mechanisms for preferential treatment for landlocked countries. I'd like to draw your attention on the law of the sea, which is one of the major topics today in international legal relations. All states without access to the sea or landlocked have serious difficulties in taking advantage of the resources of the sea, taking into account that marine areas are areas with great potential for our development, especially for the development of developing countries. All countries have the right to have access and to use oceans and seas and marine resources as stated in the Convention on the Law of the Sea. We must ensure a just distribution of rights and responsibilities with regard to marine resources because they play a decisive role for the future of peoples of the world. The sea is a right to which all peoples are entitled to, and no one should be deprived of enjoying that right. Therefore, guided by the principle of equality, non-discrimination, international solidarity, social justice, as principles to correct imbalances and global injustices, we consider it important to strengthen international mechanisms for a preferential treatment to states that find themselves deprived of access to the sea and therefore are in a severe geographical disadvantage in taking advantage of marine resources. It has been demonstrated that landlocked countries are doubly affected. We have higher costs in importing products, and our development faces major obstacles. And on this point, we must remind the international community that my country, Bolivia, was created with access to the sea. However, currently it's a landlocked country, forced by the circumstances of the past to confront various obstacles for the transport, communication, and trade. We hope that earlier rather than later, dialogue and diplomacy can triumph in order to repair the injustices of a war imposed by capitalist interests, and thus to build a better future among kindred nations. 10th proposal, expand our limited vision of human rights and democracy. There is no doubt that democracy and human rights are inseparable. The plurinational state of Bolivia has experienced in its own flesh that when democracy is undermined, the very foundation of the exercise of human rights is undermined as well. This is why we express our strongest commitment to the decisions and actions undertaken by this organization in the defense of the most vulnerable groups in our society. Bolivia has decided to rebuild its institutions by incorporating the plurinational character of our state, enshrining it, which implies that there are 36 indigenous peoples that are part of, that constitute our state. A nation that is proud of its diverse identity can build its intercultural identity, is a better country. This has occurred in a very brief period of time, and our challenge is to ensure that this transformation continues with the goal of ensuring a life that is well lived for everyone. We need to expand our criteria for human rights in relation to democracy. There cannot be human rights or democracy while the preservation of the privileges of the few takes place at the cost of the non-enjoyment of the economic, social, and cultural rights of the majority. Number 11, intergenerational solidarity. We are convinced that this generation that is vibrant and productive must show solidarity with those who have built our nations in the past. We cannot ensure equity among generations if we don't consolidate equality among present and past generations and future generations. We are concerned the focus on future generations without taking into account that older adults, older generations have done all the work that they have done. We're concerned that to date there's no universal treaty that protects older adults, and we hope that this is an opportunity to have a more in-depth reflection on this topic. Number 12, declare decade of the destruction of patriarchy to combat against all forms of violence against women and girls. I would also like to draw attention to something that alarms us at the global level. That is the persistence of violence against women and girls, and in particular, indigenous women and girls that find themselves in a situation of poverty. The pandemic and the structural crisis of capitalism have deteriorated the living conditions, especially of women that live both in cities and on farms. They continue to confront complex and intersectional forms of violence. As UN Women and the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations, UNDESA, state with regard to implementation of SDG 5 regarding the gender discrimination. And here I quote, "For a long time, the discrimination based on gender reasons has relegated women and girls to a situation of subordination with regard to men in work, in politics, and in the home. And at the current rate, the report considers that it will need 21 years to achieve universal laws that prohibit violence against women, and an exorbitant 286 years to achieve gender equality in legal frameworks." End of quote. The report also mentions significant steps backward in poverty and the possibility of that only aggravate this tendency. By the end of 2022, about 383 million women and girls will live in extreme poverty. In most of the world, many other women will have inadequate income to satisfy their basic needs, such as food, clothing, and decent housing. In our plurinational state of Bolivia, we've declared the year 2022 as the year of the cultural revolution to eliminate patriarchy, for a life free of violence against women. We are promoting policies aimed not only to strengthen normative frameworks, but also to deal with the structural causes of violence, starting from education, strengthening economic empowerment of women, and also through cultural processes to transform this regrettable reality that is caused by patriarchy as the most ancient system of oppression, and that is also linked to colonialism and capitalism. We propose that this General Assembly declares the decade of the elimination of patriarchy. And we're speaking of elimination of patriarchy because it's important to have an in-depth political, economic, social, and cultural transformation based on a community perspective geared towards building of reciprocal relations for a life that is free from any exclusion, domination, exploitation, discrimination, and violence for all of humankind and for our Mother Earth. 13th proposal, reject unilateral sanctions. It is inconceivable that in a world devastated by the crisis of pandemic, there are still unilateral coercive measures being applied with the goal of forcing governments to in the current situation, no country should be persecuted, sanctioned, or have their right to freely determine their own political, economic, and social systems in any way restricted. A demonstration of the unilateral approach that some countries have adopted is the fact that Bolivia has been added to the so-called main countries of drug transiting or drug production. The plurinational state of policy, the plurinational state of Bolivia has a sovereign policy of combating against drug trafficking that has produced important results, and we would like to confirm our commitment of our government to strengthen our combat against this global scourge. However, it is clear that the war against drugs, mainly launched by the United States, has been a failure, and therefore there's an urgent need for this country to conduct an in-depth analysis on a change of policy, and because its current policy has led to the deaths of some 100,000 people due to overdoses and drug addictions on its own territory. Another clear demonstration of the application of unilateral sanctions is the unhuman and criminal commercial and financial blockade against Cuba that has put at risk millions of citizens. It is a crime against humanity to maintain these kinds of measures and to incorporate this country to a list of countries sponsoring terrorism. But at the same time, it's a regrettable example that should make us think of how the decisions that are taken by a majority every year in this assembly are not implemented by certain countries. Lastly, Mr. President, the last proposal, number 14, is to guarantee the full validity of the United Nations Charter and the principle of multilateralism. If we are capable of overcoming the major challenges that we have as an international community, if we are not capable, humankind will face a disaster. Today, more than ever, we have a responsibility to demonstrate the effectiveness of the United Nations Charter of International Law and its institutions. The multi-dimensional crisis that our planet is confronting as a result of capitalism will only get worse unless urgent measures are taken. Only through a strengthened multilateralism will be able to achieve stronger dialogue and cooperation in the search for solutions to this crisis. To genuinely revitalize multilateralism will allow us to reestablish the validity of international law and preservation of peace with social justice, as well as to reconfigure the fragile international order to make it more pluralistic and stronger. The plurinational state of Bolivia, based on our experience since 2006, starting from our democratic and cultural revolution, has embraced with optimism our wish to overcome the current polarization in the global architecture, to overcome the capitalist order that threatens humankind and our planet. And instead of that, to build a world that is more just, more inclusive, more equitable for all of us, based on the principle of living well, as well as the diplomacy of peoples. Thank you very much.
En nombre de la Asamblea de
On behalf of
We're watching live the statements of Bolivia's President Luis Arce. The Bolivian president affirmed that the system of capitalism is in crisis and the unipolar model of the world is coming to an end. Arce said multilateralism is the only mechanism that guarantees a relationship of respect among the states. He reiterated that the member countries of CELAC declared the region a zone of peace since 2014. President Arce proposed that the UN should work tirelessly to achieve a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, that NATO should cease its expansionist plans, and that the rights of the Palestinian people must be respected so that the world can achieve the goal of global peace. The Bolivian president also called for universal health systems and for strategies that respect Mother Earth. Now we go back to the